This is not normal market forces at play. Something else is happening here, and it's Wall Street.
This is one of the neighborhoods that investors have really targeted. They're coming in, they're buying it at cash, and then they're going to hold them as rentals.
In January, 33% of all homes purchased in the U.S. were bought by investors, often Wall Street-backed companies with multi-billion-dollar funds, and rent them out, in some cases, to the very families who dreamed of owning them.
Is the American dream officially dead? My name is James Lee, and you're watching Beyond the Headlines on Breaking Points. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States witnessed an unprecedented era of prosperity and growth. The GI Bill and other government incentives made homeownership not just a possibility, but a cornerstone of the American dream. A home wasn't just a physical space, it was a symbol of success, stability, and a better future. But as the decades passed, this dream began to drift out of reach for many, and today, the landscape of homeownership is starkly different. Skyrocketing prices, increased competition from institutional investors, coupled with stagnant wages and increasing debt, have transformed the housing market into a challenging battlefield for the average middle-class family aspiring to buy their first home.
This is why first-time homebuyers are so frustrated in today's market, because what has happened in the past 5 years is devastating. In 2019, the median household income in this country was $68,000. The median home price was only $260,000. You could put down just $8,000 to get this house, and the payment out the door was only $1,600 a month, including property taxes, homeowner insurance, and PMI. In fact, you could actually make $50,000 if you had zero debt and qualify for this home with just $8,000 down. What a great time. This is why millennials weren't whining and complaining in 2019. But why is it difficult in 2024? Well, because the income has gone up to $80,000 for the median household income, but now the median home price in this country is $400,000. You now need to put down $80,000 to have a shot at qualifying for this and have zero debt.
Joining us today to break down the future of homeownership and the American dream is Freddie Smith. He is a realtor in the greater Orlando area and also a prominent creator on TikTok and YouTube. Freddie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So first question, kind of a broad one. Is the American dream dead, at least in terms of homeownership? And if so, how did it die and why does it feel so psychologically damaging?
Well, I think the biggest question of why we have this debate is people's definition of what is the middle class and what is the American dream is kind of different for many people. But I would see what I'm seeing from my comment section is that, in my opinion, the American dream, the middle class, is a working family working 40 hours a week and being able to comfortably afford the average home in America. And that was true from 1970 to 2020 for 50 years. No matter when you can pick 1979, you can pick 88, you can pick 97. No matter when you pick a date, the median household income could qualify for the average home. So that was the heartbeat of the American dream of getting that house, building a family, white picket fence, and tire swing. As of 2021, going into 2022, the prices shot up 30 to 40% on houses, and the interest rates now went up to 7%. So this has now closed the door and moved the goalpost where in most cases, you need over $100,000 of income with very little debt to have a shot at the average house. So this is shocking to a lot of first-time home buyers because this didn't happen over 10 years, 15 years. We saw it coming. This happened drastically in just the past 2 to 3 years. So everyone's kind of just catching their balance going, I just want to buy a house. I've been working for 15 years. What happened? So to answer your question, is the American dream dead? I wouldn't say it's dead, but it's definitely on life support if we don't make a change.
So then, I know the interest rates have gone up significantly, but other than that, why has there been this shock in terms of the housing prices? Because this historically has been, housing always goes up historically, but not to this type of degree, this acutely.
The interest rates played a huge part because in 2020, when the pandemic hit, they decided, hey, let's lessen this burden and let's lower interest rates so individuals can refinance, lower their housing payment. That's going to be really good for us. So they lowered the interest rates to 2.5%, which created a massive demand. So there were so many people, individuals and investors, all buying properties in 2021. That much demand rose the price by 30-40% of most homes. So we went from only having a $1,500 payment in 2019 to now $3,500 for the average house. So it jumped about $2,000. And that's putting so much pressure on individuals because if you're spending $3,000 on mortgage or even $2,000 on rent, that's eating into a lot of your income that people need for groceries, for daycare, to try to pay off their student debt. So that's what's putting pressure on Americans is the three-layered cake: housing, daycare, and college debt.
So I know you touched on some of the numbers there. Can you help us break down a little bit of how much money do you actually need to make to buy the average house? Also considering some factors like debt, other expenses that people might have, say, let's say in 2019, 5 years ago versus now in 2024, just in this time span.
Sure. And I think this is really important for people to know. When it comes to qualifying for a loan, there's a difference on what you can qualify for and what you can afford. I want to say that one more time. What you can qualify for and what you can afford is sometimes two different things. And I always talk about how you don't want to be house poor. But let's talk about the qualifying aspect first. So typically, if you're a W-2 employee, a lender is going to use about 40% of your debt to income ratio. So that means they're going to use 40% of your gross income minus your debt payments, your student loans, your car payments, and your credit card payments. Those monthlies work against you and come off your monthly allowance. So back in 2019, if you had very little debt, the average house was 260,000 at 3%. You could make about $60,000 as a family and have a shot at qualifying for the average house. That's amazing. Two people working together for 60K in America in 2019 is very doable. Fast forward to late 2022, 2023, and now here in 2024, you do need about $100,000 if you want to have a shot at getting into that 400K house. The only thing you could do to help yourself is if you put a large down payment. If you are making 80,000, but you do have $100,000 to put down and you get a $300,000 loan, you're going to have a shot at qualifying. But in today's world, the 25 to 40-year-olds, it's very unlikely that they're debt free or have $120,000 laying around to invest in a house. So that's really what's been the biggest change in the past 5 years.
I want to jump to the build to rent communities, specifically the single family home communities popping up all over the country. Florida, I know, is a big market for this. There's huge development in this type of housing. But I'm wondering if you can explain to the viewers here the economics behind that. It's still the same single family house. So why are people able to afford to rent and live there, but not able to buy these homes?
Well, the rent price is actually way cheaper. So even if you look at some of these new build communities, the houses are 450,000. So your payment, if you were going to own it, is going to be about 4,000 out the door with property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA, and everything. But they're being rented for 2,800. So it's actually cheaper to rent right now, but you're still spending $2,800 on rent, which just years ago you could have a mortgage for 1,500. So that's kind of the position we're in. But if these investors are buying them in cash, they're able to cash flow at these prices. Individual, like if you were to invest as just as an everyday person, it would be $4,000. So you would have to rent it for 4,000 for it even to make sense. But if you're paying cash, you can actually make a cash flow by offering a little bit lower rent there. So that's what people are doing, because if they know the average American can no longer buy a home, what are they going to be stuck doing? Renting. So all the institutional investors go, oh, we're going to have a nation of renters. Let's get into the housing market and buy up a bunch of communities because we know we're going to have customers. So that's a problem that if you want to talk on a policy level or if Americans can get behind, I don't think the individual investor who wants to buy 20 homes in their life should be criticized. I think that's part of the American dream. But when you have institutions spending $3 billion buying out companies and taking over tens of thousands of rentals, and you're drying up the supply, continuing to raise the price on everyday Americans is unfair, and it needs to be looked at quickly.
Let's talk about that for a second. Maybe this is veering into conspiracy, maybe it's not. But some say that home ownership as a pillar of the American dream itself was a psyop, so banks could make money writing mortgages, selling mortgage-backed securities, financializing housing, basically. And now today, maybe banks are at the point they figured out, oh, perhaps it's just more lucrative to buy and own these buildings and we'll rent them out. So lately in the past few years, I've seen more of this narrative that you just talked about. Renting is actually better in many ways. A nation of renters, you have more flexibility, they say, less to do, save on some of the other costs of home ownership that maybe people don't talk about. What are your thoughts about this?
If we had rent control, I would be a lot less concerned because if you could rent, if the average apartment or the average home in America was $1,000 and you could no longer buy a home, or it was going to take you 10 years longer to buy a home, but you could rent for $1,000, it's kind of like, okay, it's frustrating, but that's not bad. When you are blocking people from buying a home, but also taking 40% of their income for rent, that's a double-edged sword. That's when it becomes a problem. But it is cheaper in some instances to rent. But if you look back, even historically, anyone who bought a home, even if you bought a home in 2006 before the crash of '08, if you never sold your home, you'd be positive right now. So over the past 100 years, if and when you bought a house, your house is going to be worth more. And some people will debate that, and I understand from both ends. Like, why would you pay off your house and tie up 500,000 when you should put that money to work? But it's also really nice if your property taxes and homeowner insurance is only 600 a month, and that's your housing bill. Like, that's amazing. It frees up your income to be able to do other things. So it just depends on what path you want to take in life. But I do advise people, even as a real estate agent, I say some of you should be renting. You really should. Some people should be renting to save money, but make it count and try to put a plan together, because I don't think you're going to want to rent forever. But if you have to rent the next 2 to 5 years, that's okay. But try to make the most of that, just so you can set yourself up for the future.
So if we do turn into this kind of nation of renters, is it a possibility that we could see kind of an erosion? That's what goes into my head, is an erosion in the neighborhood, because we know that numerous studies have shown that home ownership has some really positive effects on the community itself. If we own something, we're more likely to take good care of it. So as a whole, what do you think the impact of that is on society?
I think it's twofold. I mean, one, with these institutional investors, they're buying up entire communities. So the entire community is renters. So that way, when it comes to the quality, but even in my neighborhood, there's probably only 10% of people who are renting here. And it's a beautiful neighborhood, and people take care of it. But I think the main concern for the renters economy is that, where are we? And I don't want to sound like dystopian or anything, but I lived in Los Angeles for 15 years, and I saw the one bedroom apartment go from 1,000 to 3,700 over a 15-year period. So I'm like, is this a foreshadow? Even in Canada, the same thing's happening. Is this a foreshadow to all the medium cities in the country? Like, is Orlando, it once was 1,200, it's now 1,900. Is it going to be 3,200 in 10 years? What happens to the individuals in 10 years if they keep raising the rent? That's my only concern. So will they create rent control? Are people going to be forced to migrate? So that's kind of the thing that I can't really put my finger on, because I can't think, if there's 100 million renters and they keep raising the price, what does that do? It's okay if LA and Miami's expensive, because if you can't hang, you got to move. But if Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Raleigh, Austin, Phoenix, Orlando, if every city starts to become 2,000-3,000 for a studio, what does that do to our country? So that's the thing I'm just kind of waiting to get more data on them the next few years to kind of see where we're headed.
You brought up rent control a couple times, so I wanted to ask you, where are you in terms of letting the market dictate prices versus having some kind of, rent control is a government intervention?
Well, it's twofold, because again, if you're a landlord and your property is going up in value, that means your insurance is probably going up, your property taxes are going up. So all of a sudden, what you thought you were going to cash flow is being eaten away, and you want to be able to raise the rent because that is fair market value. I understand the supply and demand aspect, but there are places that do have rent control. So it's not a new concept. There are states that are rent control where they can only raise it at maybe 3% a year. And that's, I guess, a little more fair if you want to look at it that way. But again, this wasn't a problem 4 years ago. So with all this new discussion, there's really nothing to point to, because we've never had such a sharp uptick of rent prices with housing prices. So we're all just trying to figure out, in this new world, how do we manage this so that people aren't stressed out? Because everyone's trying to buy a home. Even when I'm reading my comments, we're treating primary home ownership like timing Bitcoin. Like, they're going at 7% interest rate, at 6.5%. No, it's 6.2 today. It's back up to 8. I'm going to buy. It's like, for 50 years, you just worked hard. It was hard. You had to work hard, save a down payment, pay off your debt. It was a serious thing to buy a house, but it was possible. Now it's become this, like, we're like betting on our primary residence, which is unfortunate, because most of the wealth that people hold is in real estate. The boomers hold most of the wealth of this country, I think over 50%, and their biggest asset is their home. So we should look at that as a government and say, well, what do we want for young people? How about a 30-year fixed rate so they can build their life and not have to wait every year for their apartment to put a letter on the door and say, hey, you can renew your lease for just 4,700, and then you got to keep moving. It's like we need to help first time home buyers in our young generation to alleviate the stress of the cost of living. So there's got to be some sort of intervention, but that also doesn't, create too much problems for the mom and pop landlords.
I think that's a good point. And before we wrap, I wanted to ask you about the economy in general. Just over the last few years, I've come across many narratives, everything from there's going to be a certain recession to, oh, we're going to have a soft landing to a vibe session. The economy is doing well. It's just that people aren't feeling good about it. I think that's maybe potentially a Biden talking point that they've latched onto. There's also the silent depression. I know you've talked about this, where traditional economic indicators are positive, but it's not capturing the daily struggle of the masses of people who are just trying to make ends meet. You're on the ground. So what do you see as the reality of the economy, specifically in the past couple of years, but also maybe projecting the next 12 to 24 months?
This is the best way to paint the picture of our economy, and I wish a leader or politician would actually say this. For half the country, the economy is wonderful, and that is good for our country. But for the other half, they are struggling. So what differentiates between these two? If you bought your home, this is how wild this is. If you bought your home before the year 2020, you most likely have a 3% interest rate and your payment is probably around 1,500 for your house. Somebody who bought after 2020 probably has a $3,000 payment or is spending 2,500 on rent. If the people before 2020 have no college debt or their children are out of daycare, they also don't have those expenses. So you can have two neighbors living right next to each other in the same neighborhood, and one person's house is 1,500 and their payment is 3,500 plus 2,500 for daycare plus 1,000 for student loans. So this person saying, I can't make it off of 120, while their neighbor is being like, you're overspending. I make 65 and I'm crushing it. Well, your payment's 1,500. You got no college debt and your kids are grown. They're spending 7,000 on those three things. You're only spending 1,500. So that's why you're going to Applebee's, you're traveling. So the economy's booming. But that's where we're pinched. We basically are living in two different worlds. It was the people who set themselves up before 2020 and the people basically after 2020. Unless you're a multiple six-figure earner, then that's, you're doing well. But those are the two economies we're in. And I just haven't seen people address that correctly because we are living in a dual economy of good and bad. And we just have to try to figure out a way to help the people who are struggling and make it more, aware as a talking point.
Mm-hmm. And I know we've talked this whole segment about the American dream dying, but obviously housing transactions are still happening every day. So if one of your clients, I think you alluded to this earlier, you talked a little bit about this, but if one of your clients still has this aspirational goal of buying a home, what kinds of advice would you give them in terms of financial planning and building a strategy around being successful in today's economic environment?
The number one thing, if you ever want to buy a house, is to become educated on the topic. I always recommend, even before talking to a real estate agent, talking with a lender so you can understand your options. What are your down payments? What kind of loan are you going to get? What are you going to need? Do you need to pay off your vehicle? Do you need to pay off debt? Do you need to make more money? Like, understanding exactly what you need makes it easier for you to make a plan. So you just don't want to put your head in the sand and go, this is frustrating. It's like, figure out what it is so you can work towards it. Or, this is not popular. Don't come at me. This is just the truth. I think we're going to see a massive migration into different parts of our country if home ownership is important to you. Because if you and your family are making $80, $90, $100,000 a year and you can work remote, or you can transfer to Michigan or Ohio or some other places in the South, you can get a nice, charming white picket fence home for $220, $250 in different parts of the country. But are people going to want to uproot their whole life? At least it's an option. So I tell people, start looking at different places around the country on your spare time, work on paying off your debt, and really focus on, where is my career going to be in 5 years? Am I going to continue to make money? If not, and I want a home, what do I have to do at this point? So it's just being educated and writing down on a piece of paper with your family, what are your goals and what are your obstacles, so that you can put a plan together.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's sound advice. So if viewers want to hear more of you, Freddie, where can they find you?
Yeah, I Instagram or TikTok's probably my two. I try to post as much educational stuff every day. So even if you spend, 20 minutes on one of my pages and look through, I kind of give advice more nuanced on all of this and see what kind of works for you. But myself and there's many others who give advice on lending, on buying homes. So just kind of take advice from all of us and put a plan together what best suits you and your family.
Awesome. Well, Freddie, thank you for coming on the show today. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, James. I appreciate it.
That's it for me this week. If you'd like to learn more about housing in America, I've done an investigative deep dive on the private equity takeover of entire neighborhoods of single-family homes in America. The video is posted on my YouTube channel, 5149 with James Lee. Head on over, check that out, give me a follow. The link will be in the description below. As always, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.